My
I'm sorry,
daughter-in-law
but I
looked
need
me
you to
straight
leave
in the
before the
eyes and
baby
said,
arrives.
"You need to leave
How
before
can
my
you
baby
ask me to
arrives."
go?
She said it while standing in the nursery I had helped paint only 2 weeks earlier. My son Ethan was sitting just a few feet away, and he said nothing. At 67 years old, after raising him alone, after burying my husband, after selling my own house so I could help them prepare for their first child, I suddenly became the one person who wasn't welcome. But what hurt me most wasn't being asked to leave. It was the fear I saw in Madison's eyes. Because it wasn't hatred, it was terror. And weeks later, when her secret finally surfaced, it destroyed everything my son believed about his marriage. The last promise I made to my husband was that I would never become a burden to our son. Richard said those words only 3 days before cancer took him. We had been married for 43 years. In all those years, he was my best friend, my partner, and the person who always knew exactly what I was thinking before I spoke. When he passed away, the silence inside our house in Columbus, Ohio, became unbearable. For nearly 3 years, I lived alone. I learned how to eat dinner by myself. I learned how to sleep on one side of the bed. I learned how to walk through the grocery store without reaching for Richard's favorite cereal. But I never truly learned how to stop missing him. My son, Ethan Ward, called me almost every Sunday. He was 38 years old, a civil engineer with a kind heart and the same blue eyes his father had. He lived about 40 minutes away with his wife, Madison. When they announced they were expecting their first child, I cried. Not because I was becoming a grandmother. Because for the first time since Richard died, I felt like life was giving our family something beautiful again. "Mom," Ethan told me over dinner one evening, "you shouldn't be alone anymore." Madison sat beside him, one hand resting on her stomach. "We've got plenty of room," Ethan continued. "The guest room is empty. We'd love to have you here, especially once the baby arrives." I looked at Madison. She smiled politely. "Of course," she said. At the time, I believed her. 2 months later, I sold my small house. It wasn't an easy decision. That house held every memory of my marriage. Every birthday, every Christmas, every argument, every celebration. The kitchen still smelled like Richard's coffee in the mornings. His tools were still organized in the garage exactly the way he had left them. But Ethan insisted. "You'll be closer to us. You'll get to know your grandchild. You won't have to be alone." And honestly, I wanted to believe that chapter of my life was ending. I packed 43 years of memories into boxes. The day I moved into Ethan and Madison's home, the sun was shining. It was early September and the trees were just beginning to turn golden. Madison greeted me at the front door. She hugged me, but something about it felt careful, measured, like someone completing an obligation. "Your room is ready," she said. She led me upstairs. The guest room was beautiful. Fresh paint, new curtains, a small vase with flowers on the dresser. "I hope you'll be comfortable," she said. "I already am," I answered. She smiled, but her eyes never quite joined the smile. I told myself I was imagining things. Pregnancy was difficult. Hormones could make people emotional. I had been pregnant myself once. I understood. For the first few weeks, things seemed normal. I cooked dinners. I folded laundry. I drove Madison to doctor's appointments when Ethan was working. I helped assemble the crib. I painted tiny clouds on the nursery wall because Madison had chosen a sky theme. One afternoon, I stood on a ladder, carefully painting stars, while Madison watched from the doorway. "You have a steady hand," she said. "My husband was the artist," I replied. "I just helped." She was quiet for several seconds. Then she asked, "Did you always want children?" The question surprised me. "I wanted Ethan very much." She looked down at her stomach. "You ever regret becoming a mother?" I climbed down the ladder. No, I said softly. There were difficult years, but never regret. She nodded. She looked relieved. At the time, I didn't understand why. As autumn arrived, Ethan became busier at work. Large projects kept him away longer. Some evenings he returned home exhausted. Madison often stayed upstairs. She said she was tired, nauseous, overwhelmed. I tried to help. I brought her tea. I made soup. I folded baby clothes. Yet every time I entered the nursery, I felt as though I was crossing an invisible line. One morning, I found several boxes sitting outside my bedroom door. Inside were blankets and decorations I had purchased for the baby. A note rested on top. We're trying to keep things minimal. Thank you. No signature, no explanation. I carried the boxes downstairs. Madison was sitting at the kitchen table. I wasn't trying to interfere, I said gently. She looked embarrassed. Oh, I just thought we had too much stuff. Of course. She returned to looking at her phone. That conversation lasted less than 30 seconds, but something inside me shifted. A few days later, Ethan came home smiling. The doctor says everything looks perfect. He kissed Madison. She smiled at him warmly. Then she glanced at me, only for a second. But something in her expression felt different, almost nervous. That evening, we sat together for dinner. Ethan talked about work. I asked about the baby. Madison answered politely, but the warmth never reached her voice. After dinner, Ethan went upstairs to take a work call. I remained in the kitchen washing dishes. Madison stood beside me drying plates. Suddenly she said, "You don't have to do all of this." I smiled. I enjoy helping. She placed a plate into the cabinet. My mother always says grandparents should have boundaries. I looked at her. Of course they should. She nodded. Silence filled the room. Then she said something that stayed with me for weeks. This baby needs stability. I didn't understand. I agree. She turned toward me. For the first few months, it should probably just be Ethan and me. I set the dish towel down. What do you mean? She quickly smiled. Oh, nothing. Just something I was thinking about. At that moment, Ethan walked back into the kitchen. The conversation ended, but my heart felt strangely heavy. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom. Outside the window, leaves drifted across the backyard. I picked up the framed photograph of Richard that sat beside my bed. It was taken during our 40th anniversary trip. He was smiling at the camera. Sometimes I still talk to him. Perhaps widows do that because silence becomes too painful. I think something is wrong, I whispered. I didn't know exactly what. Madison wasn't openly cruel. She wasn't rude. She wasn't hostile. But every day I felt slightly less welcome, like furniture that no longer matched the room. Still, I convinced myself that everything would improve after the baby arrived. Families experience stress. Pregnancy changes people. Fear changes people. And I wanted this family to work. I wanted my son to be happy. I wanted my grandchild to know love. Most of all, I wanted to believe that moving into this house had not been a mistake. What I didn't know then was that Madison was already beginning to push me out. And the reasons had nothing to do with stress, nothing to do with pregnancy, and nothing to do with me. By the middle of October, I had begun to notice something that was impossible to ignore. Madison smiled differently depending on who was in the room. When Ethan was home, she was warm. She laughed. She asked me about my day. She thanked me for cooking dinner. But when Ethan left for work in the morning and the front door closed behind him, the atmosphere inside the house changed completely. The silence became cold. At first, I blamed myself. Perhaps I was too sensitive. Perhaps losing Richard had made me overly emotional. After all, grief changes people. It leaves you searching for rejection even when none exists. But little things began happening almost every day. One Tuesday morning, I entered the kitchen at 7 o'clock to make coffee. Madison was already sitting at the table. She looked tired. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. "Good morning," I said. She barely looked up. "Morning." I started preparing breakfast. "Would you like some eggs?" "No." "Toast?" "No." I sat down with my coffee. Several minutes passed. Then she said quietly, "You wake up very early." I smiled. "Old habits. You make a lot of noise." I looked at her. "I'm sorry. The kitchen cabinets, the coffee machine, the dishes." Her tone wasn't angry. It was worse. It was cold. "I didn't realize." She shrugged. "I guess I'm just a light sleeper." The next morning, I waited until nearly 8 before making coffee. The following day, she complained that I had left the television on too loudly. The day after that, she said the smell of onions from my cooking made her nauseous. Every complaint seemed small, insignificant, but together, they formed something much larger. One afternoon, I walked into the nursery carrying several baby books I had purchased. The room was beautiful. Soft blue walls, white curtains, a rocking chair beside the window. I had imagined sitting there one day holding my grandchild while reading stories. As I placed the books on the shelf, Madison entered. She stopped immediately. "What are those?" "Just some books." She picked one up. "Good night, Moon." I smiled. It was Ethan's favorite. She set the book down. "We're trying not to clutter the room." "Oh." "I already made a registry." "I'm sorry, I didn't realize." She folded her arms. "I'd just like to make my own decisions." Her words hurt more than they should have, because I wasn't trying to make decisions. I was trying to love a child who had not even been born. That evening, Ethan came home. Madison wrapped her arms around him. She laughed at something he said. She asked about his day. Then she turned toward me. "Brooke bought more things for the nursery." The way she said it made me feel guilty. Ethan looked at me. "Oh." "I told her we don't have room." He nodded. "Mom, maybe we should slow down a little." I felt my cheeks grow warm. "I only bought a few books." "I know," Ethan said gently. "Madison just wants things a certain way." I nodded. Of course. Everything was always about what Madison wanted. That night, I cried quietly in my room. Not because of the books, because I suddenly realized I had become a guest, and guests are expected to know when they have stayed too long. A week later, my friend Carol invited me to lunch. We had known each other for nearly 30 years. She asked how living with Ethan was going. I hesitated. "Fine." She raised an eyebrow. "That bad?" I laughed softly. "Is it obvious?" She reached across the table. "Brooke, tell me the truth." I stared into my coffee. "I don't think Madison wants me there." "Has she said that?" "No." "Then maybe you're imagining it." "I hope so." But deep inside, I wasn't sure anymore. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan left to meet a client. Madison remained upstairs. The house was unusually quiet. I decided to wash some baby clothes that had recently arrived. As I folded tiny blankets in the laundry room, Madison appeared in the doorway. "What are you doing?" "I thought I'd help." Her face tightened. "I was going to do that." "I didn't know." She walked over. She took the clothes from my hands. "I really need to do some things myself." I stood there awkwardly. "I was only helping." "I know." But she didn't sound grateful. She sounded irritated. For the first time, I felt anger. Real anger. I had sold my home. I had left behind every memory of my husband. I had moved here because my son asked me to. And now, I was being treated like an intruder. That evening, I sat outside on the back porch. The air was cold. Leaves covered the yard. Ethan joined me. "You okay, Mom?" I looked at him. He looked so much like Richard that sometimes it hurt. "I miss your father." He nodded. "I do too." We sat quietly. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to explain how isolated I felt, how Madison's behavior was changing, how I no longer felt welcome. But I saw the exhaustion in his face, the pressure at work, the excitement about becoming a father. I didn't want him caught between us. So I remained silent. The following week brought something new: restrictions. Madison placed a list on the refrigerator. No caffeine in the kitchen. No scented candles. No visitors without notice. Quiet hours after 8. No moving nursery items. At the bottom she wrote, "Creating a peaceful environment for the baby." I read the list twice. None of the rules applied to Ethan. Only me. When Ethan came home, he barely noticed. "Seems reasonable," he said. I looked at him. "Does it?" He shrugged. "Pregnancy's hard." I nodded. Again, always nodding, always understanding, always sacrificing. Late one evening, I walked past the nursery. The door was partly open. Madison sat alone in the rocking chair. She wasn't decorating. She wasn't reading. She was simply staring at the wall. She looked frightened. Not sad, not angry. Frightened. I gently knocked. "Madison!" She jumped. "Oh, are you okay?" For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she asked something unexpected. "Did Ethan ever disappoint you?" I sat beside her. "Everyone disappoints each other sometimes." She looked down. "What if someone makes a mistake they can't fix?" The question lingered between us. I thought she was afraid of motherhood, afraid of becoming a parent. I said the only thing I could. Nobody becomes a perfect mother. Her eyes filled briefly with tears. Then she quickly stood. "I'm tired." She left the room. And once again, I was left alone. That night, lying awake in bed, I replayed her words. What if someone makes a mistake they can't fix? At the time, I believed she was afraid of childbirth. I believed she needed support. I believed that if I simply loved her enough, she would eventually trust me. I was wrong. Because Madison wasn't afraid of becoming a mother. She was afraid of something else entirely. And whatever secret she was carrying was already beginning to poison our family. November arrived with colder weather and longer nights. The trees outside Ethan's house had lost nearly all their leaves, and the first frost covered the backyard each morning. The baby was due in less than 3 months. Everywhere I looked, reminders of his arrival filled the house. Tiny socks sat folded inside drawers. A stroller stood near the garage. Boxes of diapers lined the nursery closet. Everyone seemed to be preparing for the baby. Everyone except me. Or perhaps I should say that I was no longer allowed to prepare. One Saturday morning, I woke earlier than usual. The house was quiet. Ethan had left before sunrise for an engineering inspection 2 hours away. Madison was still sleeping upstairs. I decided to make cinnamon rolls. They had been Ethan's favorite since childhood. Richard used to joke that our son could smell cinnamon from a mile away. As the rolls baked, the kitchen filled with warmth. For the first time in weeks, the house felt like a home again. Around 8 o'clock, Madison walked downstairs. The moment she entered the kitchen, her face tightened. "Oh, God. Good morning, I said. What is that smell? Cinnamon rolls. She covered her nose. I can't handle that. I'm sorry. I didn't realize. She walked to the window and opened it. Cold air rushed inside. My doctor said strong smells can trigger nausea. I immediately turned off the oven. I'm sorry, Madison. She said nothing. She simply walked back upstairs. 2 hours later, Ethan returned. He smiled when he saw the rolls. Mom, you made these just like your grandmother used to. He reached for one. Before he could take a bite, Madison entered. Ethan, I told Brooke that smell makes me sick. He looked between us. Oh. The room became uncomfortable. I spoke first. I didn't know. Madison folded her arms. I've mentioned it before. No, you haven't. She looked directly at Ethan. I guess I did. Ethan sighed. Mom, maybe just ask first next time. I stared at him. Ask permission to bake cinnamon rolls? But I said nothing. Again. That afternoon, I sat in my room reading when I heard voices downstairs. Ethan and Madison were arguing. Their voices were low, tense. I wasn't trying to listen, but certain words drifted upstairs. Stress. Doctor. Not healthy. Then I heard my name. A few minutes later, Ethan knocked on my door. Mom, come in. He sat at the edge of the bed. His expression was uncomfortable. Madison's been feeling overwhelmed. I nodded. Pregnancy can be difficult. He hesitated. She feels like there are too many people involved. I stared at him. What does that mean? Nothing serious. It sounds serious. He rubbed his forehead. She just wants some space. I could feel my heart sinking. I stay in my room most of the day. I know. I cook. I clean. I help. I know. Then what exactly am I doing wrong? He didn't answer immediately, and that silence hurt more than any words. Finally, he said, Nobody's blaming you. But someone clearly was. 3 days later, something happened that changed everything. Madison invited several friends to the house. I stayed upstairs to give them privacy. Around lunchtime, I came down to make tea. The women sat around the dining room table discussing baby names. The moment I entered, the conversation stopped. One of the women smiled politely. Madison looked uncomfortable. I didn't realize you had company, I said. We're almost finished. I prepared my tea. As I turned toward the stairs, I heard one of the women ask quietly. So, that's your mother-in-law? Madison answered. Yes. And she's living here permanently. There was a pause. Madison laughed softly. Hopefully not. The room became silent. I froze. My back remained turned toward them. I don't know if they realized I had heard. Perhaps they did. Perhaps they didn't. I walked upstairs without saying a word. Once inside my bedroom, I closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed. For several minutes, I simply stared at Richard's photograph. Hopefully not. Those 2 words replayed again and again. For the first time since moving into Ethan's home, I allowed myself to ask the question I had been avoiding. What if Madison truly wanted me gone? The following Friday, I discovered something else. I had purchased a handmade blanket for the baby. It was blue and white. I had spent nearly 3 weeks knitting it. Richard's mother had taught me to knit shortly after Ethan was born. The blanket represented family, history, love. I placed it carefully in the nursery rocking chair. Later that evening, I returned. The blanket was gone. I searched the room. Nothing. Finally, I opened the closet. The blanket had been shoved into a storage bin beneath several boxes. I picked it up. Madison entered the room. "Oh, I was looking for this," she shrugged. "We already have enough blankets. I made this." "I know." I waited. She said nothing else. "Did you put it away?" "Yes." "Why?" She took a deep breath. "Because every time I walk into this room, I feel like this baby already belongs to everyone else." I was stunned. "What? You painted the walls. You bought books. You bought clothes. You made blankets." Her voice shook. "And sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing." For the first time, I saw genuine emotion. Not anger, fear. Tears filled her eyes. "I haven't even had my baby yet, and I already feel like people are taking him from me." My own anger disappeared. I understood that fear. Motherhood can be terrifying. "I would never take your child." She looked at me. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." She opened her mouth. For one brief second, I thought she was finally going to tell me what was wrong. Instead, she simply said, "I need things to be different." That night, Ethan and I ate dinner alone. Madison remained upstairs. I decided to speak honestly. "Ethan is your wife, unhappy that I'm here." He looked surprised. "Why would you ask that?" "Because I can feel it." He stared down at his plate. "She's stressed." "That's not what I asked." He sighed. "She's worried about privacy after the baby comes." I felt my stomach tighten. "What does that mean?" "Nothing's been decided." "Decided?" He didn't answer. I suddenly realized something terrible. There had been conversations, discussions, plans, and I had not been included in any of them. Later that night, I walked downstairs for a glass of water. As I passed the living room, I heard Madison speaking softly. She was on the phone. I couldn't hear everything, only fragments. "Not much longer. Before the baby. I can't do this if she's still here." I froze. There was a long silence. Then Madison said something that sent a chill through me. "I need her gone before the baby comes." The floor beneath my feet suddenly felt unstable. I quietly returned upstairs. My hands were shaking. Because this was no longer my imagination. This was no longer pregnancy hormones. This was no longer simple stress. My daughter-in-law wanted me out of the house, and I still had absolutely no idea why. I did not sleep that night. After hearing Madison say, "I need her gone before the baby comes," I lay awake staring at the ceiling until sunrise. The words echoed in my head. Not because she wanted privacy. Not because she wanted space. She wanted me gone. The difference mattered. For nearly 2 hours, I considered waking Ethan. I imagined walking downstairs, telling him exactly what I had heard, and asking him one simple question. "Did you know?" But fear stopped me. What if he believed her instead of me? What if I became the problem? Widows learn something after losing their husbands. You discover how quickly people become uncomfortable with your pain. You learn to stay quiet because you don't want to burden anyone. So I remained silent. The next morning, Madison acted as though nothing had happened. She sat at the kitchen table eating yogurt. She asked Ethan about his schedule. She discussed nursery curtains. She even asked me whether I wanted tea. Her voice was perfectly pleasant. I wondered if I had imagined the phone conversation. Perhaps I had misunderstood. Perhaps pregnancy anxiety had made her emotional. But deep down, I knew exactly what I had heard. 3 days later, Ethan came home carrying several shopping bags. "I bought the car seat," he announced. He looked happier than I had seen him in months. Madison smiled. They spent nearly an hour reading instructions in the living room. I sat nearby knitting. For a few minutes, everything felt normal. Family, home, hope. Then Ethan said something that changed the entire evening. "Mom, after the baby arrives, maybe you can help with night feedings." I smiled. "Only if Madison wants me to." Before Madison could answer, Ethan continued. "You've done this before. We'll need all the help we can get." The room became strangely quiet. Madison lowered her eyes. She folded the instruction booklet. Then she said quietly, "Actually, I think we should handle things ourselves." Ethan looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "I think the baby should bond with his parents." "Of course. And I think we need privacy." I carefully set down my knitting needles. Ethan frowned. "Mom isn't talking about raising him." "I know." The tension grew. Finally, Madison looked directly at me. "I just think every family needs boundaries." I felt my face grow warm. "I understand." "No, I don't think you do." Ethan looked up immediately. "Madison." She took a breath. "For weeks, I've tried to be patient." I stared at her. Patient. Every room in this house feels crowded. My chest tightened. "You reorganize things." "I cook dinner." "You buy things for the baby." "I bought books." "You make decisions." "I've made no decisions," her voice rose. "Because this isn't your child." Silence filled the room. Even Ethan looked shocked. I spoke quietly. "I know that." "Then why do I constantly feel like I'm sharing my pregnancy?" Tears filled her eyes. "I can't breathe in my own house." Ethan stood. "Okay. Everyone calm down." But it was too late. For the first time, everything that had been building for months finally reached the surface. I stood slowly. "I never wanted to hurt you." Madison wiped her eyes. "You don't understand." "Then explain it to me." "I can't." The answer came too quickly, too sharply, as if something else stood behind her words. Something much larger. I returned to my bedroom. An hour later, Ethan knocked on my door. He looked exhausted. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "This whole situation." I looked at my son. "I need you to tell me something honestly." He sat down. "Okay." "Does your wife want me to leave?" He said nothing, and that silence gave me my answer. Finally, he spoke. "She's struggling." "That isn't what I asked." He looked down. "She thinks things might be easier if you stayed somewhere else after the baby comes." I felt something break inside me. Not anger, not even sadness. It was disappointment. Deep, painful disappointment. "This was your idea." "I know." "You asked me to sell my house." "I know." "You asked me to move here." He rubbed his eyes. "I know." "Then why am I suddenly a problem?" He looked miserable. "Mom, nobody thinks you're a problem." "But your wife wants me gone." He didn't answer. Again, always silence. I realized that my son was terrified of choosing between his mother and his wife. And so he chose neither, which meant he chose the easier path. The following weekend, I drove to the cemetery. I often visited Richard when life became difficult. The November air was cold. I sat beside his grave for nearly an hour. "I don't know what to do," I whispered. I promised we wouldn't become burdens. The wind moved through the trees. I think our son needs me. I looked at Richard's name carved into the stone. But I don't think his wife does. When I returned home, the house was quiet. Ethan was working. Madison was upstairs. I entered the kitchen. On the counter sat several brochures: retirement communities, senior apartments, independent living facilities. My hands froze. One brochure had a sticky note attached. Affordable. Another said, quiet environment. A third had several lines highlighted. I stared at them for several seconds. Then I heard footsteps. Madison stood in the doorway. She immediately saw what I was holding. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she walked forward. Those aren't what you think. Then tell me. She crossed her arms. I was just looking. For me, silence. Madison? Her eyes filled with tears again. I can't do this. Do what? She shook her head. I can't have this baby with everyone watching me. No one is watching you. Yes, they are. Who? She looked directly at me. You. The answer hurt, because it was honest, or at least partly honest. I spoke softly. I've only tried to help. I know. Then why are you pushing me away? Her voice dropped. Because this isn't your family anymore. The words hit me like ice water. Not your family anymore. I had raised Ethan. I had buried his father. I had sacrificed my home. And now I was being told that I no longer belonged. Tears filled my eyes. She saw them. For one moment, she appeared guilty. Then she looked away. I didn't mean it like that. But you said it. She sat down. She looked exhausted, defeated, almost frightened. I just need things to go back to normal. I stared at her. What does normal look like to you? She whispered the answer. Just me, Ethan, and the baby. No grandmother. No extra room. No witness. No Brooke Ward. At dinner that evening, nobody spoke very much. Ethan sensed something had happened. Madison remained quiet. I barely touched my food. As I washed dishes later, I looked through the kitchen window. Snow had begun to fall. The first snow of the year. I remembered standing in another kitchen decades earlier, holding baby Ethan while Richard cooked dinner. Family had once seemed so simple. Now it felt fragile, broken. And yet, something about Madison's behavior still troubled me, because beneath her anger, I kept seeing fear, not dislike, not hatred, fear, as though she believed that if I remained in the house long enough, I would discover something she desperately needed to keep hidden. And I was beginning to realize that perhaps she was right. December arrived with snow. The neighborhood looked beautiful from the outside. White rooftops, glowing Christmas lights, children building snowmen in nearby yards. Every house seemed full of warmth, except ours. Inside the Ward home, the silence had become unbearable. After our conversation about boundaries, something changed between Ethan and me. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't angry. But he had begun to disappear. He left for work earlier. He stayed at the office later. Sometimes he ate dinner upstairs with Madison. Sometimes he claimed he had already eaten. When we sat together in the same room, conversation felt forced. I knew exactly what was happening. My son was trying to avoid choosing between his wife and his mother. Unfortunately, avoiding a choice is often a choice itself. One evening, I found him sitting alone in the garage. The door was partially open, allowing cold air to enter. He stared at nothing. I sat beside him. "Your father used to do this." He looked at me. "What?" "Sit in the garage when life became difficult." A small smile appeared. "Dad always said the garage was cheaper than therapy." For a moment, we both laughed. Then the silence returned. "Ethan?" "Yeah." "Are you happy?" He took a long time to answer. "I don't know." That frightened me, because this was the same boy who once knew exactly what he wanted. The same boy who had fallen in love with Madison almost immediately. The same boy who had spent 6 months planning his proposal. "What happened?" I asked. He looked down. "She's scared of becoming a mother." He hesitated. "I think so," but something in his voice suggested he wasn't certain. I wanted to tell him about the phone call. I wanted to tell him about the brochures. I wanted to tell him that his wife wanted me gone. Instead, I simply said, "You don't have to carry everything by yourself." He nodded, but he still said nothing. The following week, Madison began locking herself inside the nursery. Sometimes for hours. I would hear her moving furniture, opening drawers, closing cabinets. One afternoon, I knocked gently. "Madison?" No answer. "Are you okay?" Several seconds passed. Finally, she opened the door only a few inches. Her eyes were red. "I'm fine." "You've been in here a long time." "I'm organizing." She quickly closed the door again. The behavior worried me. But what worried me even more was the growing distance between her and Ethan. They argued quietly at night, doors closed, voices lowered. One evening, I heard Ethan say, "I can't keep doing this." Madison answered something I couldn't understand. Then, silence. The next morning, they behaved normally, as if nothing had happened. A few days later, I drove to the grocery store. When I returned, I noticed Madison's car was gone. She had told Ethan she planned to stay home. Several hours passed. When she finally returned, she appeared nervous. She carried no shopping bags, no receipts, nothing. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine." "You were gone a while." "Doctor's appointment." "I thought your appointment was next week." Her eyes met mine, only briefly. Then she looked away. "They moved it." I nodded, but something felt wrong. That evening I mentioned it to Ethan. "How did the appointment go?" He looked confused. "What appointment?" "Madison's." He frowned. "She didn't have one today." The room became very quiet. Madison was standing at the sink. For a brief moment, nobody spoke. Then she said, "I called this morning." Ethan looked surprised. "You didn't tell me." "I forgot." The answer seemed harmless. Yet I noticed something. Fear. Not anger. Not annoyance. Fear. As if she was afraid of making a mistake. As if every question carried danger. That night, I found myself unable to sleep again. Around midnight, I walked downstairs to make tea. The house was dark. As I entered the kitchen, I heard voices. One voice belonged to Madison. The other came through her phone. She was standing near the back door. I remained hidden in the hallway. "I can't keep talking to you." Silence. "No." Long pause. "I said no." Another silence. Then, "Because he's starting to notice." My heart began beating faster. She turned slightly. "I told you not to call." Several seconds passed. Then I heard the sentence that would remain in my mind for weeks. "Once the baby comes, everything will be over." I couldn't hear the response. Madison suddenly looked toward the hallway. I stepped backward immediately. My teacup nearly slipped from my hands. A few moments later, her bedroom door closed upstairs. I remained standing alone in the darkness. Who was she speaking to, and why was she hiding it? The next morning, she acted exhausted. Her eyes were swollen. Her hands trembled slightly while drinking coffee. Ethan noticed. "Didn't sleep?" She forced a smile. "Just uncomfortable." He kissed her forehead. "I'll come home early." She nodded. After he left, she remained at the table. For nearly 10 minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, "Do you ever regret staying in one place too long?" The question surprised me. "What do you mean?" "Like when life gives you a chance to leave, but you don't." I thought about Richard, about our marriage, about my house. "No." She looked down. "Maybe some people should leave before they hurt everyone." Something about her voice frightened me. "You haven't hurt anyone." She almost laughed. "You don't know that." "No, I don't." She looked directly at me. For several seconds, neither of us moved. I suddenly felt that she wanted to tell me something. Something important. Something painful. Instead, she stood. "I have to rest." And she walked upstairs. Later that afternoon, I began wrapping Christmas presents. I had purchased gifts for the baby, a stuffed bear, a small blanket, a music box. As I wrapped them, I remembered Ethan's first Christmas. Richard had worked overtime that year. Money was tight. We could only afford 3 presents. Yet somehow, it had been the happiest Christmas of my life. Because our family was together. Now our family sat beneath the same roof, and somehow we had never felt farther apart. 2 nights before Christmas, something happened that I could not ignore. I woke around 1 o'clock. Footsteps moved downstairs. I assumed it was Ethan, but when I looked from my bedroom window, I saw Madison standing outside near her car. Snow was falling lightly. She wore only a coat over her pajamas. She was speaking on her phone. She looked terrified. I could not hear her words, but I could see her face. She was crying. Several times she looked toward the house, toward the upstairs windows, toward Ethan's bedroom, as if she was afraid someone might see her. Then she said one name that I was never supposed to hear. Tyler. The name was unfamiliar, yet the effect on Madison was obvious. Her entire body shook. Several moments later, she whispered, "We don't have much time." And then the call ended. I quietly stepped away from the window. My hands were trembling. Because now I knew 2 things. First, my daughter-in-law was hiding something. Second, whatever secret she carried involved a man named Tyler. And for reasons I still couldn't understand, she was absolutely terrified that I might discover the truth. After hearing the name Tyler, I could no longer convince myself that everything inside our house was normal. For weeks I had told myself that Madison was simply overwhelmed, pregnant, anxious, afraid of becoming a mother. But fear has a different face than guilt, and what I had seen in the backyard that night was not the fear of childbirth. It was the fear of being discovered. The next morning, Christmas Eve arrived with fresh snow. The neighborhood looked beautiful. Children pulled sleds down the street. Lights covered every porch. Music played from nearby houses. Inside our home, however, the atmosphere felt fragile. Ethan was making coffee. Madison sat quietly at the kitchen table. She looked exhausted. Her skin appeared pale. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. Several times I caught her staring at her phone, waiting, watching, as though she expected bad news. "Are you feeling okay?" Ethan asked. "I'm fine." "You barely slept." "I said I'm fine." The sharpness in her voice surprised both of us. Ethan looked hurt. She immediately softened. "I'm sorry." He kissed her forehead. "Maybe we should cancel dinner tomorrow." "No." "You're exhausted." "No," she repeated. "The family is expecting us." Family? The word seemed to bother her. That afternoon, I wrapped the final Christmas gifts. One package contained a small silver ornament engraved with the words, "Baby Ward, First Christmas." I had purchased it weeks earlier. At the time, I imagined hanging it on the tree with Madison beside me. Now I wasn't sure if I would even be allowed to hold my grandchild. Around 4 o'clock, Madison came into the living room. She stood beside the Christmas tree, the lights reflected in her eyes. For several moments, she simply stared. Then she said, "Did Ethan ever disappoint you?" The question startled me because she had asked something similar weeks before. "Of course." "What happened?" I thought about my son. "He lied sometimes." She looked at me carefully. "Big lies." "Sometimes." "And you forgave him?" "Usually." She lowered her eyes. "What if the lie changes everything?" My heart suddenly began beating faster. There it was again. The same fear, the same hidden pain. I set down the ornament. "Madison, what are you trying to tell me?" Her eyes filled with tears. For one moment, I believed she was finally going to confess whatever had been haunting her. Instead, she shook her head. "Nothing." "You've been unhappy for months." "I'm tired." "You're frightened." She looked directly at me. "No, Brooke." Her voice became very quiet. "I'm terrified." The honesty of that answer sent chills through me. "Of what?" She stood up immediately. "I need to lie down." And once again, she walked away. Christmas morning arrived with snow falling outside the windows. For years after Richard died, Christmas had become painful. This year, I had hoped things would be different. I made breakfast. Ethan opened gifts. Madison smiled politely. But something felt wrong. She barely touched her food. She checked her phone constantly. At one point, her phone vibrated. She looked at the screen. The color disappeared from her face. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked. "Work email." She quickly placed the phone face down. Several minutes later, she excused herself. I watched her walk upstairs. 10 minutes passed. 15. 20. Finally, Ethan said, "I'll check on her." He returned looking worried. "She says she has a headache." The rest of Christmas passed quietly. That evening, Ethan fell asleep in front of the television. I remained awake, reading in the living room. Around 11, I heard footsteps. Madison entered wearing her coat. "Going somewhere?" She froze. "No." "You're dressed." "I just needed air." She opened the back door. Cold air rushed inside. I hesitated. Then I followed. Snow covered the yard. Christmas lights glowed softly around neighboring homes. Madison stood near the fence. Her shoulders trembled. I approached carefully. "You're freezing." She didn't answer. "Madison?" She finally spoke. "Have you ever wanted to run away?" I stared at her. "After Richard died?" She looked at me. "I mean, before something terrible happened." I felt my stomach tighten. "What terrible thing?" She shook her head. Again, always the same answer. Then suddenly, headlights appeared. A vehicle slowed near the street. Madison immediately stiffened. The car stopped briefly. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then it drove away. Madison released a breath. "Who was that?" I asked. "No one." But her voice was shaking. She hurried back inside. I remained standing in the snow. Something was terribly wrong. And whatever frightened her was no longer simply a secret. It was becoming a threat. 3 days later, Ethan returned to work after Christmas. The house became quiet again. Around noon, I heard Madison speaking on the phone upstairs. Her bedroom door was partly open. I wasn't trying to listen, but certain words carried into the hallway. "You promised." Silence. "No." Long pause. "I can't tell him." My heart pounded. Then, "Tyler, please." The name again. Tyler. Who was he? An old boyfriend. A relative. Someone from work. Why was she speaking to him in secret? Why did she sound so frightened? I quietly returned downstairs. Several minutes later, Madison entered the kitchen. She saw me sitting at the table. For the first time in months, neither of us pretended. Neither of us smiled. Neither of us acted normal. Finally, I said, "Who is Tyler?" The color disappeared from her face. "What? I heard his name." Silence. Absolute silence. She stared at me. For several seconds, I thought she might collapse. Then she whispered, "You weren't supposed to hear that." The answer sent ice through my veins. Not "who not, you're mistaken." Not "I don't know anyone named Tyler." You weren't supposed to hear that. She sat down slowly. Her hands were shaking. "Does Ethan know him?" I asked. "No." "Should he?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. I don't know anymore. I had never seen her so broken. All her anger was gone. All her coldness had disappeared. Only fear remained. I softened my voice. "Madison, if something is wrong, tell me." She shook her head. "I can't." "Why?" "Because if I do..." She stopped speaking. "If you do what?" Her voice cracked. "Everything falls apart." The words hung between us. Everything falls apart. At that moment, I realized something that changed the way I saw her. Madison wasn't trying to hurt me simply because she disliked me. She wasn't pushing me away because I was an annoying mother-in-law. She wanted me gone because I was close. Too close. I lived in the house. I noticed things. I asked questions. I saw fear in her eyes. And somehow, without realizing it, I had become the one person she could not hide from. Several minutes later, she stood. Before leaving the kitchen, she said something that stayed with me. "If Ethan ever finds out, he'll never forgive me." I looked at her. "What would he find out?" She wiped away tears. But she didn't answer. And as she disappeared upstairs, I suddenly understood one terrible truth. Whatever Tyler represented, it had the power to destroy my son's entire world. January arrived with freezing rain and gray skies. The baby shower was scheduled for the second Saturday of the month. Madison's mother had insisted on hosting it. Several cousins were coming from Cincinnati. Friends from work planned to attend. Neighbors had been invited. Even some of Ethan's coworkers said they would stop by. From the outside, it looked like a celebration. Inside our house, it felt like a countdown. After our conversation about Tyler, Madison barely spoke to me. She avoided eye contact. She spent most of her time upstairs. Several times, I heard her crying behind closed doors. Twice, I heard Ethan asking her what was wrong. Twice, she answered, "Nothing." Yet something had clearly changed. She no longer seemed angry. She seemed desperate. One Monday morning, I found her sitting alone in the nursery. The room was dark. Only a small lamp illuminated the rocking chair. She held one hand against her stomach. The other covered her eyes. "Madison," she quickly wiped away tears. "I'm okay." "No, you aren't." She looked exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that reaches far beyond pregnancy. I sat beside her. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then she said quietly, "Have you ever wanted to tell someone the truth and realized it was too late?" The question made my heart ache. Sometimes. "What happened?" "I told the truth anyway." She stared at the floor. "I don't think I can." "About Tyler." She immediately stiffened. I regretted saying the name. For several seconds, the room became completely silent. Finally, she stood. "I need to get ready." Again. Always one step away from honesty. Always retreating. The days leading up to the baby shower felt unbearable. Ethan seemed increasingly stressed. Madison became more withdrawn, and I felt trapped between them. One evening, Ethan sat beside me in the living room. "I think she's depressed." I looked at my son. "Have you talked to her doctor?" "She says everything is fine." "Do you believe her?" He hesitated, and that hesitation frightened me, because for the first time, Ethan was beginning to doubt. "She's been acting strange," he admitted. I chose my words carefully. "People usually have reasons." He looked toward the stairs. "I just want my wife back." The sadness in his voice nearly broke me. Because I loved my son, and whatever secret Madison carried was slowly destroying him. Saturday finally arrived. The baby shower began at 1 o'clock. Snow covered the yard. Pink and blue decorations filled the living room. A banner stretched across the fireplace. "Welcome, Baby Ward." Madison wore a pale blue dress. She looked beautiful and absolutely terrified. Guests arrived carrying gifts. Laughter filled the house. Music played softly. For a while, everything seemed normal. I helped serve food. I refilled coffee. I stayed mostly in the kitchen. I didn't want to upset Madison. Several guests asked me questions. "When is the baby due?" "Are you excited to be a grandmother?" "Will you help with the baby?" Each question made Madison visibly uncomfortable. At one point, one of Ethan's aunts smiled and said, "Brooke will probably spoil this little boy more than anyone." Several people laughed. I smiled politely, but Madison suddenly spoke. "I think Ethan and I need time alone first." The room became quiet. Her aunt looked surprised. "Oh, of course." Madison forced a smile. "I think new parents need space." No one responded. Conversation slowly resumed. But the atmosphere had changed. About 30 minutes later, a family friend approached me. "Brooke, did you make the blanket?" She held the blue blanket I had knitted. "Yes. It's beautiful." Before I could answer, Madison spoke from across the room. "There's already too much stuff." The comment stunned everyone. The woman looked embarrassed. I quietly said, "It's all right." But Madison continued. "Sometimes people don't realize when they're overstepping." Ethan looked up immediately. "Madison." She took a breath. "No, I need to say this." The entire room had become silent. 20 people sat watching. I felt my face growing warm. Madison turned toward me. "I appreciate everything Brooke has done." Her voice trembled. But this is my baby. No one moved. No one spoke. She continued. And sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing inside my own pregnancy. Tears appeared in her eyes. I don't want people making decisions for me. I stared at her. I had never made decisions. I had bought books, blankets. Love, that was all. Ethan stood. Honey, no. She looked directly at me. I need boundaries. The room became painfully quiet. Several guests looked away. Others stared at their plates. I wanted to disappear. At 67 years old, I had never felt more humiliated. I stood slowly. I'm sorry if I've made you uncomfortable. My voice shook. I only wanted to help. Madison looked down, but she said nothing. I walked into the kitchen. My hands trembled. For several moments, I simply stood beside the sink. I could hear quiet conversation behind me, embarrassed whispers, uncomfortable laughter, the kind people use when they don't know where to look. Then someone entered. It was Ethan. Mom! I didn't turn around. You don't need to apologize. I know. His voice cracked. I'm sorry. I finally looked at him. Why is this happening? He had no answer, because he didn't know. Neither of us did. At that moment, the front doorbell rang. Nobody expected anyone else. Several guests looked up. Ethan walked toward the door. Madison suddenly froze. Her entire body became rigid. I saw the color disappear from her face. Who is it? Someone asked. Ethan opened the door. Outside stood a man, approximately 35 years old. Dark coat, snow covering his shoulders. He looked nervous, very nervous. The moment Madison saw him, she stood up so quickly that her chair nearly fell backward. For several seconds, nobody moved. The man looked directly at her. Madison looked absolutely terrified. Ethan frowned. Can I help you? The stranger hesitated. His eyes never left Madison. I think I have the wrong address. His voice sounded uncertain, almost rehearsed. Madison took several quick steps forward. I'll handle this. She reached the door. The man looked at her. Something passed between them. Recognition, fear, history. She whispered something none of us could hear. The man nodded, then he turned and walked away. The front door closed. The entire room remained silent. Ethan looked confused. Do you know him? Madison answered immediately. No. Too quickly. Far too quickly. Who was he? Ethan asked. I don't know. Her hands were shaking. Her breathing had changed. I looked through the front window. The man reached a dark sedan parked across the street. Before entering, he looked back toward the house, toward the window, toward Madison. And then he drove away. The party ended early. Guests left quietly. No one mentioned the scene, but everyone had seen it. Everyone had noticed her reaction. Later that evening, after the house became quiet, I stood in the kitchen alone. I looked outside. The tire tracks remained visible in the snow. Madison walked downstairs. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She saw me standing there. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question. Was that Tyler? She closed her eyes. One tear rolled down her cheek. And without saying a single word, she gave me my answer. The morning after the baby shower, the house felt abandoned. Paper plates still sat in trash bags near the kitchen. Half-melted ice floated inside coolers. Blue ribbons hung loosely from chairs. The banner that read, "Welcome Baby Ward," still stretched across the fireplace, though now the words felt almost cruel. Nobody spoke during breakfast. Ethan stared into his coffee. Madison barely touched her toast. I washed dishes that didn't need washing, simply to avoid looking at either of them. The previous afternoon had changed something. Ethan had seen his wife's reaction. He had seen the fear in her face. And for the first time, he had witnessed a secret standing at his own front door. Around 10 o'clock, he finally spoke. "Do you know that man?" Madison froze. "No." "You seem to." "I told you I don't." "He looked at you." She stood abruptly. "I'm tired." Ethan's voice sharpened. "Madison?" She turned toward him. "What do you want me to say?" "The truth." For several seconds, neither moved. Then she walked upstairs. The bedroom door closed. Ethan remained sitting at the table. I had never seen him look so lost. That evening, he asked me something unexpected. "Mom, did she say anything to you?" My heart immediately began to race. I could have told him everything. The phone calls, the fear, the name Tyler. But I looked at my son. He was exhausted, broken, and somehow I knew that whatever truth was coming would arrive soon enough. "I think she's scared," I said quietly. He rubbed his face. "Of what?" I wished I knew. 2 days later, a snowstorm arrived. Ethan left early for work because his office was closing before noon. Madison remained upstairs resting. The house was silent. I decided to take down some of the Christmas decorations. Richard always said January felt easier once the decorations disappeared. As I carried boxes toward the garage, I noticed a black trash bag sitting beside the recycling bins. Part of a photograph protruded from the top. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something made me stop. Perhaps it was intuition. Perhaps it was simple curiosity. I pulled the photograph free. The picture had been torn in half. A young Madison stood beside a man I had never seen before. They appeared happy, close. The man's arm rested around her shoulders. Behind them stood a small white house. The photograph had clearly been folded many times. My hands trembled. The man was the same person who had appeared at the baby shower. Tyler. I turned the photograph over. At first, I saw nothing. Then I noticed handwriting. 3 words. "Tell Ethan." Below those words, "Before it's too late." I sat down in the garage. For several minutes, I could not breathe. Who had written it? Tyler Madison, someone else, and why throw it away? I slipped the photograph into my sweater pocket. For the rest of the afternoon, I said nothing. That night, Ethan worked late. Madison remained upstairs. I sat alone in my bedroom. Richard's photograph rested beside me. I looked at the torn picture again. Madison looked younger, happier. Tyler looked directly at the camera. There was something familiar about his expression. Not anger, not resentment, love. Whatever had existed between them had once been very real. The next morning, Madison entered the kitchen. Her eyes immediately dropped to the counter. She looked confused, then nervous. She began opening drawers, checking cabinets, searching. I watched quietly. Finally, I asked, "Looking for something?" She looked at me. "No." But she was lying. I could see it. She continued searching. 10 minutes later, she left the kitchen. An hour afterward, she knocked on my bedroom door. "Have you seen a photograph?" I felt my pulse quicken. "What photograph?" She hesitated. "An old picture." I remained silent. Her face became pale. "You found it?" It wasn't a question. I looked at her. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I reached into my drawer. I handed her the picture. The moment she saw it, tears appeared. She looked at the words written on the back. Her hands shook. "Who wrote this?" I asked. She closed her eyes. "I don't know." "Was it Tyler?" Silence. "Madison." She sat down. For the first time since I had moved into the house, she looked completely defeated. "We were together a long time ago." The confession barely rose above a whisper. "Before Ethan." She nodded. "Why is he here now?" She looked toward the door, as though she feared someone might hear. "I can't explain." "Try." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "It's complicated." "No, it's serious." She said nothing. Then I asked the question that had haunted me for weeks. "Is Ethan in danger?" Her head lifted immediately. "No." "Then what?" Her voice cracked. "I don't know what to do." I softened my tone. "Tell your husband." She began crying harder. "I can't." "Why?" "Because he'll hate me." The answer chilled me. Because people do not fear hatred over small mistakes. They fear hatred over betrayal. The bedroom became quiet. Outside, snow fell softly. Finally, she spoke again. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "What happened?" Again silence, then footsteps sounded downstairs. Ethan had come home early. Madison quickly stood. She wiped her face. She took the photograph from her lap. I reached out. "No." She looked at me. "Please." For several seconds, we stared at one another. Finally, she handed it back. "I don't know how much time I have." The words frightened me. "What does that mean?" But she was already walking away. That evening, I could barely eat. The photograph sat hidden inside my dresser. The words on the back repeated inside my mind. "Tell Ethan before it's too late." Too late for what? Too late before the baby arrived. Too late before the truth emerged. Too late before my son lost everything. 3 days later, while Ethan was at work and Madison was sleeping upstairs, I made a decision I never imagined making. I typed the name Tyler Bennett into my computer. Dozens of results appeared. Most meant nothing, but one caught my attention. A real estate company. A photograph. The same man. My hands began shaking. He lived less than 30 miles away, close enough to drive to the house, close enough to appear at the baby shower, close enough to terrify my daughter-in-law. I stared at his face on the screen. For the first time, Tyler Bennett was no longer just a name. He was real. And deep inside, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever existed between him and Madison had not ended, not completely. And somehow, my unborn grandchild stood directly in the middle of it. The closer we came to the baby's due date, the smaller my world became. The nursery was finished. The hospital bag sat beside Madison's bed. The car seat had already been installed. Every clock inside the house seemed to count down toward the same moment. And with every passing day, I felt less welcome. After discovering the photograph, I watched Madison carefully. She no longer argued with me. She no longer criticized my cooking. She no longer complained about noise or boundaries. Instead, she became strangely quiet. It was almost as if she had accepted that I knew something. Not everything, but enough. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after the baby shower, Ethan came home late from work. He looked exhausted. A major bridge project had created problems at his office, and he was spending nearly 12 hours a day working. Madison barely spoke during dinner. Halfway through the meal, she suddenly stood. "I'm going upstairs." Ethan looked concerned. "You okay?" "I'm tired." He reached for her hand. She pulled away. Only slightly, but I noticed. So did he. After she disappeared upstairs, Ethan sighed. "I don't know what's happening anymore." I wanted to tell him. I wanted to show him the photograph. I wanted to ask him who Tyler Bennett was. But every time I imagined his face, I stopped. Because once the truth entered this family, nothing would ever be the same again. The following Tuesday, Ethan left before sunrise. The house was quiet. I spent the morning folding laundry. Around 11 o'clock, I went upstairs to place towels in the linen closet. As I reached the hallway, I noticed something unusual. My bedroom door was open. I always kept it closed. When I entered the room, my heart nearly stopped. My suitcase sat open on the bed. Clothes had been folded inside. Several sweaters were missing from my dresser. My toiletries had been packed. Even Richard's photograph had been wrapped inside a towel. For several seconds, I simply stood there. I could not understand what I was seeing. Then I heard footsteps. Madison stood in the doorway. Neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked, "What is this?" She looked pale. "I was going to talk to you." I stared at the suitcase. "You packed my things." She folded her arms, but her voice trembled. "I found a place." "A place?" "A senior apartment community." I looked at her in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" She swallowed. "After the baby comes, we need privacy." My chest tightened. "You packed my belongings." She looked away. It would only be temporary. I could barely breathe. "You had no right." She suddenly became emotional. "I don't know what else to do." "You ask me. You'll say no." "Of course I'll say no." Tears filled her eyes. "Brooke, please." "No." The word came out stronger than I expected. For months, I had remained quiet. I had apologized. I had retreated. I had accepted humiliation. But seeing my husband's photograph inside a suitcase broke something inside me. "You do not pack my things." She began crying. "I can't have this baby like this." "Like what?" "With you here." The words echoed through the room. I stared at her. "You are asking me to leave my son's home." "No." "Yes." "No, I'm asking for time." "Why?" She covered her face. "Because everything is falling apart." "What is—" She shook her head. Again, always the same answer. By the time Ethan arrived home that evening, the suitcases remained exactly where they were. He entered our bedroom and froze. "What happened?" I looked at him. "Ask your wife." Madison stood behind him. She looked terrified. Ethan turned toward her. "Why are Mom's things packed?" Silence. "Madison, she spoke softly. I thought it might help. Help what? The baby. His expression changed. You packed her things? She nodded, without asking, without speaking to me, without speaking to him. For the first time in months, Ethan became angry. What were you thinking? Tears immediately appeared. I can't do this anymore. What? This? She pointed toward the house. The tension, the fighting, the pressure. Ethan looked confused. There hasn't been fighting. She turned toward him. You don't understand. Then explain it. Her breathing became uneven. She looked at me, then at Ethan. For one terrible moment, I thought she was finally going to reveal everything. Instead, she whispered, I need your mother to leave. The silence that followed felt endless. Ethan looked stunned. You're serious? She nodded. For how long? I don't know. He stared at her. This is my mother. And this is my baby. The room became painfully quiet. Finally, Ethan said something I never expected. No. Madison looked shocked. No. No. His voice remained calm. My mother sold her house. That wasn't my decision. We agreed. I changed my mind. The words hit him hard. I saw pain cross his face. Real pain. The kind a husband feels when he realizes his marriage is shifting beneath his feet. He looked at me, then back at her. I'm not asking my mother to leave. Madison's face went white. She suddenly sat down on the bed. Her hands began shaking. I can't do this. Ethan knelt beside her. What's wrong? She said nothing. Tell me. Still nothing. Then she whispered, I thought there would be more time. My heart stopped. More time. The same phrase, the same fear, the same desperation. Ethan frowned. Time for what? She closed her eyes. I can't. He looked devastated. For nearly a minute, nobody moved. Finally, she stood. I need air. She walked downstairs. The front door opened, closed. Ethan sat quietly beside the suitcase. He looked older than his 38 years. I don't understand her. I looked at my son. Neither did I. But I was beginning to understand one thing. Whatever secret Madison carried had a deadline, a date, a moment, and somehow that moment was connected to the baby's arrival. After dinner, Ethan helped unpack my clothes. Neither of us spoke very much. When he unwrapped Richard's photograph, he held it for several seconds. Dad would know what to do. I smiled sadly. Your father usually pretended to know. He laughed softly. Then his eyes filled with tears. I'm failing both of you. No. Yes. I touched his hand. You've been trying to save everyone. He looked down. I don't think I can anymore. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I returned upstairs for a glass of water. As I passed the kitchen, I noticed papers sitting on the counter. Several forms. A brochure. A contract. At first, I thought they were hospital documents. Then I saw the signature. Ethan Ward. My stomach dropped. I picked up the page. It was paperwork from one of the senior apartment communities. The signature looked like Ethan's, but something felt wrong. Very wrong. I had watched my son sign his name for nearly 40 years. This signature seemed hesitant, uneven, almost copied. Footsteps sounded behind me. Madison stood there. She saw the paper in my hands. The color disappeared from her face. And at that moment, before either of us spoke, I realized something terrifying. She had not only packed my belongings, she had already begun making plans to remove me. And somehow, she had used my son's name to do it. For 2 days after finding the paperwork, I said nothing. The forged signature sat in my dresser beside the photograph of Madison and Tyler. Together, the two items felt connected somehow. One represented the past. The other represented desperation. Both represented fear. Madison avoided me entirely. She remained upstairs. Ethan buried himself in work. The house felt like a place where everyone was waiting for something terrible to happen. On Thursday afternoon, snow covered the streets again. I was sitting in the living room when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Instead, I answered. "Hello," a woman spoke softly. "Is this Brooke Ward?" "Yes." "My name is Rachel Bennett." The name meant nothing. Then she continued, "I'm Tyler's sister." My heart nearly stopped. I sat upright. "I'm sorry." There was a pause. "I think we need to talk." For several seconds, I couldn't answer. "How did you get my number?" "Tyler gave it to me." "Why?" Another silence. "Because he's afraid something terrible is about to happen." I felt cold. "What does your brother want?" "He wants the truth to come out." The words sent a chill through me. She suggested meeting at a small coffee shop 20 minutes away. For almost an hour, I debated whether I should go. Perhaps it was dangerous. Perhaps it was a mistake. But deep inside, I already knew the truth was moving toward us, whether I wanted it or not. And so, I drove. The coffee shop was nearly empty. Rachel Bennett sat near the window. She appeared to be in her early 40s. Dark hair, kind eyes. She looked tired, very tired. When she saw me, she immediately stood. "Mrs. Ward?" "Brooke." She nodded. "Thank you for coming." I sat across from her. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked, "Who are you?" She took a deep breath. "I'm Tyler's older sister." "Why are we here?" She looked down at her coffee. "Because my brother made mistakes." I waited. He also loved someone very much. My chest tightened. "Madison?" She nodded. The name hung between us. They were together for almost 4 years. I stared at her. 4 years. Longer than I expected. Before Ethan? Yes. What happened? Rachel looked toward the window. They planned to marry. The words struck me. Marry. I had assumed Tyler had been a brief relationship, an old boyfriend, nothing serious. But this was different. Then why didn't they? Rachel sighed. My brother was irresponsible. How? He changed jobs constantly. He struggled financially. Sometimes he drank too much. He wasn't ready to settle down. And Madison left. Yes. I remained silent. Rachel continued. Then she met Ethan. I pictured my son. Stable, responsible, kind. Everything Tyler apparently wasn't. Did Tyler know? Yes. How did he react? She looked sad. He said she chose security. The words hurt me, not because they insulted Ethan, but because they sounded believable. My son provided stability, a good career, a house, a future. I asked the question that had been haunting me. Why is Tyler contacting her now? Rachel's expression changed. She seemed suddenly uncomfortable. He didn't want to. What does that mean? She looked directly at me. Because he believes the baby might be his. The world became silent. Every sound inside the coffee shop disappeared. I heard only my own heartbeat. What? Rachel lowered her eyes. Tyler and Madison saw each other several times after she became engaged. I could barely breathe. Are you saying? I'm saying my brother believes the timing doesn't make sense. I stared at her. No. I'm sorry. No. My voice sounded weak. My son. My grandchild. Our family. Suddenly, everything felt uncertain. When did this happen? About 8 months ago. My mind immediately began calculating. Madison's pregnancy, the due date, the timeline. I remembered her fear, her panic, the question she had asked me. What if someone makes a mistake they can't fix? My hands trembled. Does Ethan know? Rachel shook her head. No. Does Tyler know for certain? No. Then why contact her? Because he wanted a paternity test. The room spun. A paternity test. The words felt impossible. Rachel reached into her purse. She removed an envelope. I didn't want to bring this. What is it? Messages. I stared at the envelope. Tyler wanted someone else to know the truth. I didn't touch it. For several seconds, I simply looked at the white paper resting between us. Finally, I asked, Why are you telling me? Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Because my brother came to the baby shower. I felt my stomach drop. He said he just wanted to see her one last time. The image returned instantly. Madison standing frozen. The man at the door, the fear, the terror. He never meant to hurt anyone. But he came. She nodded. He thought she might finally tell Ethan. She didn't. No. I looked down at the envelope. Suddenly, I understood why Madison wanted me gone. Because I watched. I noticed. I asked questions. If I left the house, she could control the story. She could delay the truth. Perhaps forever. Rachel spoke again. The baby might be Ethan's. The word might offer little comfort. My brother doesn't know. Then why now? Because Madison stopped answering his calls. I closed my eyes. The late-night conversations, the fear, the secret meetings. Tyler wasn't threatening her. He wanted answers. Perhaps he wanted the truth as much as I did. When I finally drove home, snow had begun falling again. The envelope sat on the passenger seat. I had not opened it. I wasn't ready. When I entered the house, Ethan sat in the living room. You've been gone a while. I forced a smile. I met someone. He nodded. Mom. Yes. He looked exhausted. Do you think people can really hide things forever? The question startled me. Why? He looked upstairs. Because I don't know my wife anymore. My heart broke for him. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to hand him the envelope. I wanted to protect him. But I also knew that once the truth entered this house, it would destroy everything. That evening, After everyone had gone to bed, I finally opened the envelope. Inside were several printed text messages. Most were short. Some were emotional. Then I reached the final page. One message from Tyler. One response from Madison. Tyler, you have to tell him. Madison, if Ethan finds out before the baby comes, he'll lose everything. I stared at the words, and for the first time I realized something even more terrifying. Madison wasn't only afraid of losing her marriage, she was afraid of what would happen when the baby arrived, because somehow the birth itself would reveal the truth she had spent months trying to hide. After reading the messages inside Rachel's envelope, I barely slept. The sentence repeated in my mind again and again. If Ethan finds out before the baby comes, he'll lose everything. Not we, not our family, him. As though Madison believed the truth would destroy only my son. And perhaps she was right. For nearly a week, I carried those messages in my purse. I said nothing. I showed them to no one. Every morning, I looked at Ethan and wondered whether I was protecting him or betraying him. Every evening, I watched Madison and saw a woman slowly collapsing beneath the weight of her own secret. The due date was less than 3 weeks away. Time was running out. One Tuesday morning, Ethan left early for work. Snow had finally begun to melt. The sky was gray. The house felt strangely quiet. Madison came downstairs wearing one of Ethan's old sweaters. She looked exhausted. She poured coffee, then immediately pushed it away. Her hands were trembling. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked, "When was your first appointment?" She looked up. "What? Your first pregnancy appointment?" Her face became pale. "Why, I was just wondering." She looked down. "Early June." The answer stayed in my mind. June. I had spent nearly 40 years raising a son. I remembered exactly when Ethan and Madison had announced their pregnancy. I remembered the timing. I remembered the excitement. And suddenly, something felt wrong. Not emotionally, mathematically. The weeks, the months, the due date. I said nothing, but later that afternoon, I opened my calendar. I began counting backward. The numbers unsettled me. Very unsettled me. That evening, Ethan mentioned the next doctor's appointment. "I'll leave work early Friday." Madison froze. "Why? You said your appointment is Friday." She looked confused. "No, it's Monday." Ethan frowned. "I thought it was Friday." "You remembered wrong." Something passed between them. A small moment, but important. Ethan looked uncertain. Madison looked frightened. After dinner, she went upstairs. Ethan remained in the kitchen. "She's changed appointments 3 times. I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "The dates never stay the same." "Maybe the office reschedules." "Maybe." But he didn't sound convinced. Neither was I. The following afternoon, while putting away towels in the upstairs bathroom, I noticed a folder partially hidden inside the linen cabinet. At first, I assumed it contained insurance papers. Then I saw Madison's name. I hesitated. I knew I should walk away. I knew I had no right to search through her things, but months of fear, lies, and secrecy had brought us to this moment. I opened the folder. Inside were several appointment summaries, ultrasound records, blood work, medical forms. My hands began to shake. One appointment date had been crossed out. Another had been corrected in blue ink. The estimated due date appeared on 2 different pages. The dates did not match. Not exactly, only by a few weeks. But enough. Enough to make me understand why Madison had been terrified. Enough to understand why Tyler existed. Enough to understand why she wanted me gone before the baby arrived. Because mothers notice details. Grandmothers notice details. And I had been watching. I returned everything exactly as I had found it. My heart pounded the entire afternoon. That evening, Madison came downstairs. She looked at me, really looked at me, as if she somehow knew. Perhaps she did. Finally, she asked, "Did you go upstairs today?" I answered honestly, "Yes." Her eyes searched my face. "For laundry?" "Yes." Several seconds passed. Then she whispered, "You know." It wasn't a question. I felt my chest tighten. "I know something." She sat down, slowly, carefully. Her hands rested on her stomach. Tears appeared immediately. "I never wanted this." I took the chair across from her. "Then tell me." She looked toward the stairs. Ethan was still at work. The house was silent. For the first time, there was nowhere left to run. She spoke very quietly. "When Ethan proposed, I thought my life was finally becoming stable. I listened. I loved him." "Did—" She closed her eyes. "I still do." The answer sounded genuine. Painfully genuine. Then she continued, "Tyler and I were over." "Were you—" She nodded. "We kept talking." "Why, I don't know." But she did know. Loneliness, history, attachment. People return to old relationships for many reasons, most of them painful. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I thought it was finished. When—" She could barely speak. "Just before the wedding." My stomach dropped. The wedding. Not before Ethan. Not years earlier. Before the wedding. I made a terrible mistake. The room became silent. I told myself it didn't matter. She placed her hand against her stomach. Then I found out I was pregnant. I closed my eyes. There it was, the truth. Not complete, but enough. "When did you realize?" Her voice cracked. "After the doctor changed the dates." "Does Tyler know?" She nodded. "He started asking questions." "And Ethan?" She began crying harder. "He was so happy." My heart broke, not only for my son, for all of us, because I could finally see the truth. Madison had not spent months trying to hurt me. She had spent months trying to delay the inevitable, the due date, the timeline, the questions, the baby. Everything pointed toward one terrible possibility. I spoke softly. "Is the baby Tyler's?" She looked at me. Her answer came as a whisper. "I don't know." The honesty of those 3 words felt devastating, because for months she had been carrying not one secret, but 2. First, that she had been with Tyler shortly before her marriage. Second, that she could not be certain who the father was. She wiped her tears. "If Ethan finds out, he'll leave me." I remained quiet. "He'll hate me." I thought about my son, his kindness, his loyalty, his love for her, and I honestly did not know. She looked at me. "That's why I needed you gone." I finally understood. Because I was asking questions. She nodded. "You notice things." "Yes." You remember dates. Yes. You look at people. Tears continued falling. I was terrified you would figure it out. I leaned back in my chair. Months of tension suddenly made sense. The phone calls, the fear, the arguments, the fake signatures, the desire to send me away. Everything had been built upon one terrible secret. Then she said something that frightened me more than anything else. There's something else. I looked at her. What? She lowered her eyes. I asked Ethan to sell your old property after the baby comes. My blood ran cold. What? He said the money could help us. I stared at her. That house belonged to Richard and me. She began crying again. I know. The truth had become even darker. This wasn't only about paternity. It wasn't only about Tyler. Madison had planned a future built on Ethan's money, my sacrifices, and a child whose father remained uncertain. At that moment, I heard the garage door open. Ethan had come home. Madison looked toward the hallway. Terror returned instantly. The same terror I had seen months earlier. Because now the truth was no longer hidden. It was sitting between us. And sooner or later, my son was going to walk directly into it. The garage door opened. Ethan stepped into the kitchen carrying his briefcase and a bag of groceries. He smiled. Neither Madison nor I returned it. He stopped immediately. What's wrong? Madison stood beside the table. Her face was pale. Her eyes were swollen from crying. I remained seated. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The silence itself seemed alive. Ethan slowly placed the groceries on the counter. What's happening? Madison looked at me. I looked at her. This was the moment she had feared for months. And somehow, despite everything, I still wanted her to tell him herself. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Ethan stepped closer. Madison, she lowered her eyes. I don't feel well. He immediately moved toward her, but before he reached her, she doubled over. A sharp cry escaped her lips. Her hand gripped the edge of the table. Madison! Another pain struck. She collapsed into a chair. I saw panic instantly fill Ethan's face. The baby! She nodded. Oh, God! Her contractions had begun. 3 weeks early. Everything moved quickly after that. Hospital bags, car keys, phone chargers, insurance cards. I helped Ethan guide her to the car. Madison clutched his hand. Her face was white. Between contractions, she kept repeating, I'm sorry. At first, Ethan assumed she meant the pain, the fear, the labor. But I knew better. The drive to the hospital felt endless. Snow fell lightly outside. The emergency entrance glowed beneath bright lights. Nurses rushed forward. Wheelchairs, questions, paperwork. Everything blurred together. Within an hour, Madison had been admitted. The contractions were real. The baby was coming. Ethan remained beside her. I sat quietly in the waiting area. The envelope from Rachel still rested inside my purse. The messages, the photograph, the lies. Everything had followed us here. Hours passed. Doctors entered and left. Nurses checked monitors. The labor progressed slowly. At nearly midnight, Ethan walked into the hallway. He looked exhausted. She's asking for you. For me? He nodded. I entered the room quietly. Madison lay against the pillows. Tears covered her face. Machines beeped softly. She looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable. I need to tell him. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. I sat beside her. Then tell him. She shook her head. I'm afraid. I know. What if he hates me? I looked toward the doorway. Ethan was speaking with a nurse. He deserves the truth. Fresh tears appeared. I waited too long. Yes. Another contraction came. She cried out. Several minutes passed before she could speak again. Then the door suddenly opened. A nurse entered. There's a man asking for Madison Ward. My heart stopped. Madison closed her eyes. Ethan looked confused. What man? The nurse glanced at her chart. He says his name is Tyler Bennett. The room became completely silent. No one moved. No one breathed. Ethan slowly turned toward Madison. Her face had lost all color. Who? She began crying. The nurse looked uncomfortable. He said it's important. Ethan stared at his wife. Who is Tyler? Madison couldn't answer. The nurse quietly left the room. For several seconds, only the sound of the fetal monitor filled the silence. Then Ethan looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear in my son's eyes. Real fear. What is happening? I reached into my purse. My hands trembled. The envelope, the messages, the photograph, months of secrets. I looked at Madison. She closed her eyes. One small nod, permission, or surrender. I handed the envelope to my son. Ethan. His voice broke. What is this? I think you need to read it. He opened the envelope slowly. The photograph fell into his lap. He stared at it, then at the messages. The room seemed to stop. Minutes passed. No one spoke. Finally, he looked at Madison. Who is he? Tears streamed down her face. He and I were together. When? Silence. When? Her answer came as a whisper. Before our wedding, I watched something inside my son break, not explode, break, like glass. When? Please. When? She cried harder. A few times. His breathing became uneven. You slept with him? She nodded. When? Again, she hesitated. Then, after we got engaged. The words hit him like a physical blow. He stepped backward. No. She reached toward him. Ethan. No. His voice echoed inside the room. No. Another contraction struck. She cried out, but Ethan could barely hear her. He looked at me, at the photograph, at the messages, then back at his wife. The baby? The room became silent again. Madison covered her face. I don't know. The answer destroyed him. He sat down. His hands shook. I don't know. The words repeated inside the room. Not yes, not no. I don't know. The doctor entered several minutes later. Everything suddenly became medical. The labor was progressing quickly. The baby would arrive soon. But even the doctors could feel the tension, the grief, the devastation. Around 1 a.m, another knock came at the door. This time, Tyler himself stood outside. He looked exhausted. Snow still covered his coat. He saw Ethan. Everything changed. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Tyler looked at Madison, then at Ethan. His voice was quiet. I'm sorry. Ethan stood. You need to leave. I know. Who are you? Tyler swallowed. I wish I wasn't here. Madison began crying again. The doctor asked him to wait outside. But before he left, Tyler removed his phone. There are messages. Ethan looked away. I don't care. You should. He placed the phone on the table. I asked her to tell you. Madison covered her face. I begged her. The room felt unbearable. Tyler's eyes filled with tears. I never wanted this. Ethan looked at him. Is the baby yours? Tyler answered honestly. I don't know. The exact same answer. The same uncertainty. The same pain. And somehow that honesty felt worse. Because nobody knew. Not my son. Not Tyler. Not even Madison. As Tyler left the room, he stopped beside me. Very quietly, he said, I'm sorry for your son. Then he walked away. At 2:15 in the morning, the baby was born. A little boy. Healthy. Crying. Perfect. For a brief moment, nothing else mattered. Not secrets. Not lies. Not betrayal. Only the child. The nurse placed him in Madison's arms. She sobbed. Ethan stood across the room. He couldn't move. The doctor smiled. But nobody smiled back. Because although a child had entered the world that night, the truth had entered with him. And nothing in our family would ever be the same again. The first hours after the baby's birth felt unreal. Outside the hospital windows, snow continued falling. Inside the maternity ward, nurses moved quietly from room to room. A newborn boy slept peacefully in a clear bassinet, and 3 adults sat inside the same room carrying completely different heartbreaks. Ethan stood beside the window. Madison lay in bed. I remained near the door. No one knew what to say. The child had arrived, but the question had arrived with him. Who was his father? The doctor entered shortly after sunrise. She checked Madison's vitals, examined the baby, spoke gently. Everything appeared healthy. When she left, the silence returned. Finally, Ethan spoke. His voice sounded unfamiliar, almost empty. How long? Madison closed her eyes. What? How long did it continue? Tears immediately filled her eyes. A few weeks. After we got engaged, she nodded. He looked away. Why? Her voice shook. I was scared. Of marrying me. No. Then what? She began crying. Everything changed so fast. I watched my son. He wanted answers, but no answer could repair what had already happened. He sat beside the bed. Did you love him? Madison remained silent. Answer me, she finally whispered once. Did you love me? Yes. At the same time. The question shattered her. She covered her face. I don't know. Ethan stood again. The movement frightened the baby. The little boy began crying softly. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Ethan looked at the child. His child. Perhaps. Maybe. He gently lifted the baby into his arms. And the moment he held him, something changed. The anger remained. The betrayal remained. But love entered the room. Because regardless of blood, this little boy had already become real. Several hours later, Ethan asked me to walk with him. The hospital cafeteria was nearly empty. He sat across from me. For a long time, he stared at his coffee. Then he finally asked, Did you know? The question I had dreaded. Not everything. What did you know? I told him. The phone calls, The fear, Tyler's name, the photograph, Rachel, the messages. He listened quietly. When I finished, he looked down. Everyone knew before me. No. You did. Only recently. He rubbed his eyes. I was standing right there the entire time. My heart broke for him, because he wasn't only grieving a marriage, he was grieving his own certainty, the belief that his life was safe, stable, true. He looked at me. Do you think the baby is mine? I answered honestly. I don't know. He nodded. Neither do I. The next morning, Tyler returned. This time, Ethan agreed to speak with him. The two men sat in a private waiting room. I remained outside. Madison stayed upstairs. Neither of them wanted her present. Nearly an hour passed. When Ethan finally emerged, his face had changed. He looked exhausted, but calmer. Later, he told me about the conversation. Tyler admitted everything. He admitted the relationship, the meetings, the messages. He admitted asking for a paternity test. But he also admitted something else. He still loved Madison. Not the married woman, not the pregnant woman, the woman she had once been. And when she stopped answering his calls, he became afraid. Afraid that he might have a child. Afraid that Ethan would never know. Afraid that everyone would suffer. For the first time, Ethan saw him not as an enemy, but as another man who had lost something. The hospital suggested a paternity test. Everyone agreed. There was no argument, no denial, only exhaustion. The samples would take time, several days, perhaps longer. Those days became some of the longest of our lives. Madison returned home with the baby. Ethan slept in the guest room. The nursery remained quiet. I helped feed the baby, changed diapers, rocked him during the night. And strangely, Madison no longer pushed me away. One evening, she entered the nursery while I held the baby. She sat beside me. He likes you, I smiled. He likes being warm. Tears appeared in her eyes. I treated you terribly. I looked down at the sleeping child. Yes. She nodded. I was afraid. I know. I thought if you left, I could keep pretending. I finally asked the question that had stayed inside me for months. Did you ever hate me? She looked surprised. No. Then why hurt me? Her voice cracked. Because you reminded me of everything I wanted to become. I looked at her. You loved Ethan. She nodded. You loved Richard. Tears rolled down her face. You had a real family. She looked toward the baby. And I destroyed mine before it even started. I reached for her hand. For the first time since I moved into the house, she allowed me to hold it. 3 days later, the call came. Ethan answered. I watched his face. The room became completely silent. Madison ate frozen. The baby slept in the bassinet. After several seconds, Ethan thanked the nurse. Then he ended the call. Nobody breathed. Madison could barely speak. Ethan, he looked at her. His eyes filled with tears. Then he looked toward the child. And finally, he said, He's mine. Madison collapsed into tears. Real tears. Months of fear. Months of guilt. Months of lies. Released all at once. The baby was Ethan's son. Tyler was not the father. The room filled with relief, but not joy. Not yet, because the truth had still destroyed something. The child belonged to Ethan, but the betrayal still belonged to Madison. That night, Ethan sat alone beside the crib. I entered quietly. He looked at his son, sleeping peacefully. I should be happy. You are. He nodded slowly. But I'm also angry. That's allowed. He looked at me. What would Dad do? I smiled sadly. Your father would probably yell first. He laughed softly. Then tears came. I don't know if I can forgive her. I looked at my son, the little boy sleeping nearby, the family standing at the edge of ruin, and I realized something. The paternity test had answered one question, but the harder question still remained. Could love survive betrayal? And none of us knew the answer yet. Spring arrived slowly that year. The snow melted from the sidewalks. The trees outside our neighborhood began to bloom again. Life moved forward, even when our hearts struggled to do the same. Nearly 6 weeks had passed since the baby's birth. The paternity test had answered the question everyone feared. The little boy was Ethan's son. But truth does not erase betrayal. And forgiveness does not arrive simply because people want it to. Ethan remained in the guest room. Madison slept upstairs with the baby. They spoke politely. They discussed feedings, doctor appointments, diapers. But the marriage that had once filled the house with laughter had become quiet. Very quiet. One morning, I found Ethan sitting at the kitchen table before sunrise. He stared at his coffee. The baby monitor rested beside him. Couldn't sleep? I asked. He smiled weakly. I haven't slept in weeks. I sat down. Outside, birds were beginning to sing. The world was waking up. Inside our house, we still felt trapped in winter. He finally spoke. I look at him, and I love him. I knew he meant his son. But then I look at Madison. He stopped. I remember everything. I understood. Trust had broken, and broken trust heals slowly. Sometimes it never heals at all. Do you still love her? I asked. He looked out the window. Yes. The answer surprised him. It would be easier if I didn't. Love usually isn't the problem. He nodded. Trust is. For several weeks, counseling became part of their lives. Madison attended individual therapy. Ethan met with a counselor alone. Sometimes they attended together. Sometimes they didn't. No miracle happened. No dramatic reconciliation. Only difficult conversations, painful honesty, and small steps. One afternoon, Madison asked if we could talk. The baby was sleeping. Sunlight filled the living room. She looked healthier than she had in months. Still tired, still sad, but no longer terrified. I owe you an apology. I sat quietly. You owe me several. She smiled weakly, then tears appeared. I made you the enemy. Yes, because you saw things. I nodded. You asked questions. Yes. And I was afraid. She looked down. I think I wanted you gone because you reminded me of the kind of woman I wasn't. I remained silent. She continued. You loved Richard. You raised Ethan. You survived losing your husband. You built a family. She wiped away tears. I was afraid I was destroying mine. I finally reached for her hand. This time, there was no anger between us, only sadness. You made terrible decisions. She nodded. I know. But you also carried them alone. Fresh tears fell. I thought if the baby was Ethan's, everything would go away. It doesn't work that way. No. She looked toward the nursery. I almost lost everything anyway. Several days later, Ethan came to my bedroom. Richard's photograph still rested beside my bed. He picked it up. He often did that now. I think I need to move. The words surprised me. What do you mean? I need space. I looked at my son. From Madison. He nodded. I need time to decide whether I can rebuild this. I understood. Love sometimes survives betrayal. Sometimes it doesn't. And neither choice makes a person weak. A month later, Ethan rented a small apartment 15 minutes away. He still visited every day. He helped with the baby. He attended appointments. He remained a father. But he and Madison separated. Not with screaming, not with lawyers, not with hatred, with grief, real grief. The day he moved out, Madison stood in the doorway holding the baby. Neither of them cried. Perhaps they had already cried enough. After Ethan left, she turned to me. I never thought this would happen. I answered honestly, neither did I. By early summer, I made my own decision. I wanted to return to my house. Fortunately, I had rented it rather than selling it completely. The tenants had recently moved. The house needed repairs, fresh paint, new carpets, some work in the kitchen, but it was still mine. The first day I walked inside, I cried. Richard's workshop remained untouched. The backyard looked exactly the same. Sunlight entered through the kitchen window. For the first time in nearly 2 years, I felt at home. Ethan helped me move. As we carried boxes into the living room, he suddenly stopped. I'm sorry. I looked at him. For what? For all of it. His voice broke. I let you stand alone. I placed my hand on his cheek. You were trying to save your family. I hurt you. Yes. Tears filled his eyes. I don't know how to forgive myself. I smiled gently. Then start by becoming the man your father raised. He nodded, and for the first time in months, I saw my son again. Not the frightened husband, not the broken man. My son. Several weeks later, an envelope arrived. The handwriting belonged to Madison. Inside was a letter. I read it sitting on my back porch. The sun was setting. Birds sang in the trees. The letter said, Brooke, you were the only person who saw the truth before I did. I spent months blaming you because I was ashamed of myself. You offered me kindness, and I answered with fear. You loved my child before he was even born. You protected Ethan even when you had every reason not to. You were never the problem. I was. I don't know whether Ethan and I will find our way back to each other. But I know I will spend the rest of my life trying to become the woman you believed I could be. Thank you for loving my son when I was too afraid to love myself. Madison. I read the letter twice, then I placed it beside Richard's photograph. Some wounds heal, others leave scars. Months later, Ethan brought the baby to visit. He placed his son in my arms. The little boy smiled. The afternoon sun filled the kitchen. And suddenly, for the first time in a very long time, peace entered my heart. I realized something then. Families are not destroyed by mistakes. They are destroyed by secrets. Truth hurts. But truth also gives us the chance to rebuild. My son was no longer the same man. My daughter-in-law was no longer the same woman. And I was no longer the woman who believed love meant sacrificing herself. I had learned that love also needs boundaries, forgiveness, and courage.